When you went back to the farm, did you walk in and overnight just turn it around? Or
No.
tell us about how you did it. I knew you didn't do
Well,
that.
David advised us to go slow, and he said, don't do more than a third of your acreage the first year, so you sort of figure out what works and what doesn't.
So it was in corn and soybeans?
No, we're primarily cereal grains.
Of course.
You know, my father had sort of evolved you know, as most conventional operations, pretty much of a monocropping system, primarily wheat, some oats, and then a practice which has been very common in North Dakota is fallow, you know, which you you don't take a crop off. And
let it rest.
Right. And so we had to sort of try to figure out. I mean, David said, you know, crop rotation is going to be really important, but I can't help you with North Dakota because I'm a Corn Belt farmer in Nebraska.
Site specific.
So that was one of the things that really you know, we had to sort of learn by doing, as was mentioned. And we so we originally said, okay, you know, we'll take this slow. We'll take a third of our acreage. David tried to encourage us to do control strips within each field, so we have a fairly good measure on what was actually happening. But we're dealing with 3,100 acres up there, and I just didn't have the time to build in control strips. And so he said, well, then do companion fields. And so we did. We, you know, we'd have a field of wheat on one side of the fence and another field of wheat on the other side of the fence, and one we'd manage organically and the other one conventionally. And that first year, it was wonderful. I mean, there were no problems, and the wheat yields were every bit as good in the organic fields as the conventional fields. And so we said, hey, this is a piece of cake, no problem.
Success.
Do the whole thing.
So did you?
So next year we did the whole thing, and it was a disaster.
The weather was wrong.
Well, yeah, exactly. You know, looking back on it now, it's very clear, you know, what happened. The first year was an ideal growing season. The weather was warm, the spring was warm, the nitrogen was available, and everything worked. And the following year was just the opposite. It was a cold spring. Nitrogen was tied up. Weeds started to grow, and the wheat didn't compete, and it was really a disaster. And but we really at that point then felt, well, you know, we really don't want to go back, so let's tough it out. So we had a second year that was not quite as much of a disaster, but still a very tough year. And then we finally started to begin to get pieces of the rotation in place that started to work, and we gradually began to work our way out of that. And, of course, a very important lesson for us in that was that you do need to move slowly. One of the key things in this is that when you're making this transition, you're really moving from one system to another kind of system. It's not a matter of changing technologies. I think that's one of the key lessons that's very hard to learn. Because we tend, I think, in American agriculture to think primarily in terms of technologies that work rather than understanding how systems work. And what we learned was that the basic transition which needs to take place is to move from a system that relies primarily on inputs, which is what I like to say a factory kind of model. It deals with inputs and outputs, and you decide what kind of outputs you want and what kind of inputs you need in order to achieve that, and you hope it's economically viable. Well, the organic system is a nutrient recycling system. And that's an entirely different way of approaching the management of an operation. And you begin to look at, you know, where your nutrients are, how do you bring them back into the system, and in that nutrient recycling system, how do you deal with the pest problems, the weeds and the insects, and introduce mechanisms by which the pest cycles can be broken. And once you get the new system working, then you can begin to pull the inputs away. If you try to pull the inputs away before the new system is working, then you got the disaster. And so that's the key thing, I think, to making
that would be your main piece of advice for people contemplating this kind of a switch, is to think of it as a system switch.
That's right, and there's, unfortunately, there is now, you know, there are a number of commercial ventures out there. Which I don't mean to be down on commercial ventures. I mean, farming is a commercial venture. But there are some commercial ventures out there that I think are trying to suggest that there's some shortcuts to this. You know, that if you buy the right product, then you can make this transition in a year. And you know, but that's just not true. It can't be done. Soil is an organism. It's a biological organism. Simply takes time for it to go through that transition. And so there's no substitute for time.
You're not recommending 2 years, which is what you ended up doing to disastrous effects.
That's right.
What kind of a time frame are you
Yeah, it depends on how the land was managed when you start. But generally, we figure 3 to 5 years is what it takes to make a successful transition.
I know one of the things I read was that you're currently raising a multiple number of crops. You're
Yes.
raising sunflowers?
Yeah, we actually are growing 8 different crops now.
And what are they?
In 3 different rotations. The crops we're raising, that we're raising now is wheat, rye, sunflowers, buckwheat, millet, soybeans, oats, and flax.
And do you find them? Do you find a market for them, or do you create that?
We have connected up with a company that markets all of our grains for us, and most of that is export market.
Out of the country?
Yes, right. Yeah, I would venture to say probably at least 95% of our crop gets exported. There's simply a stronger market for grains that qualify as organic in Europe and Scandinavian countries than there are in the United States, although the United States market is growing. And we, but the markets, of course, for some crops are much stronger than others, and they change from year to year. Last year, for example, flax was very hot. You know, if you had any flax at all, why you didn't have any trouble moving it. And then, of course, like most farmers, everybody said, "Hey, this is great, and we're all going to raise some more flax."
Too much flax.
Yeah, and since it's a small market, you can very easily oversupply. So, you know, the best strategy, I think, is to try to maintain a good balance of crops and stay with that, so that as markets go up and down, we often keep a crop in storage over a year if the market is bad and wait for it to get good again, and that seems to work out for us. So.
Do you feel that looking at the market aspect would be the second critical thing for a farmer to be doing?
Certainly, especially when you're building the crop rotation. I mean, it doesn't do any good to have some crops in the rotation that are perfect agronomically and you can't sell them. So,
no, you have to eat them all.
That's right. So, you know, one needs to look at, in building the rotation, one needs to look, first of all, at the agronomic needs. You know, what kind of soil structure and you know, what kind of climate, you know, what kinds of crops are going to do well, what are suited well for that particular ecosystem. And then you need to look at equipment needs and facilities, storage facilities, and to see whether or not that's going to, you know, mean a major capital investment or a minor one. And then you need to look at the market and whether or not there's a market for those crops, and also, you know, some other things like you know, on-farm needs. If you have livestock, you know, you need to provide for those.
And you do, don't you?
Yes, we do.
You have both cattle and sheep?
No, we had sheep for a time. It was a short-term investment, but basically we're in a cow-calf operation.